Hello. In Assessment 2, I viewed housing affordability for young renters in Sydney as a weak system problem rather than simply a shortage of housing. Two references dynamics stood out. First, rising rent reduces young renters' ability to save for a deposit, delaying home ownership and keeping them in the rental market longer. Second, investment incentives increase demand for housing as an asset, raising prices and pushing more first-home buyers back into renting. This shows me that the housing crisis persists because multiple rational decisions interact to reproduce unaffordable outcomes. In Assessment 2, I focused on the structural reform in taxation planning and rental regulation, assuming these changes, alongside cross-sector coordination, was the main pathway to improving housing affordability. My thinking has changed. I now see that identifying policy is only part of the change. Reform also depends on how actors respond to financial incentives, how success is measured, whose knowledge is included, and whose interests have most influence. I therefore shift from asking what needs to change in the housing system to what conditions would allow meaningful change to happen. Three interconnected tensions shift what is realistically possible in Sydney housing system. The first is financing and incentives. Developers, investors, and financial institutions are shaped by incentives that prioritize financial renters. So, commercially irrational decisions do not necessarily lead to affordable housing outcomes. The second tension is measurement. Governments can readily count dwellings, approve prices and rents, but renters and community organizations may value harder to measure outcomes such as housing security, reduced stress agency, and community connection. Third, governance and power fragment responsibility across federal taxation, state planning, local approvals, and private markets. These actors operate under different priorities, while renters have comparatively limited influence over decisions that directly affect them. Fragmented responsibility also weakens accountability. These tensions explain persistent unaffordability for young renters. Investors and developers seek viable returns, while renters and community housing providers need affordability and security. Governments balance supply planning, taxation, and political constraints so new housing can remain affordable and reform difficult. Realistic change may come from improving how housing reforms are designed, tested, and evaluated, rather than expecting one policy to fix the system. First, innovation could involve co-design reforms with young renters and testing options through small-scale prototypes and feedback. This brings renters' lived experience into problem definition and allow politics to be refined through feedback rather than expert design. However, co-design only has value when renters can genuinely influence decision-making. Second, measurements should look beyond outputs such as dwelling delivered to whether young renters experience better affordability, housing security, and stability. A TOC can make explicit the assumption that increased housing supply improves affordability, so it can be tested against the housing data and renter outcomes. These levers create opportunities rather than certainty. Co-design can still be constrained by unequal power, while housing outcomes are shaped by wider market policy and economic forces beyond any single intervention. Adaptive leadership fits this challenge because housing affordability involves competing value, uncertainty, and multiple actors. I would observe patterns in rents, supply, investor, and incentives, and enter security. Interpret how key renter perspective and evidence into co-design and policy discussion. I would also question my own assumptions when communicating with NSW housing policy makers. I would ask whether current policies are improving affordability and housing security, not just increasing supply. I would emphasize enter outcomes and clear accountability while avoiding blame, preserving retail agency, and being transparent about uncertainty and trade-offs. Thank you.